Missing fingers, cigarette burns, 3-day ordeals, and trashed houses. Wow, maybe the way that sounds, maybe Australia should add that in to their tourism guides. Now, wouldn't it be amazing if someone besides Johnny Depp and AH could tell us some unbiased form of truth about what happened in the house? Like how, I don't know, they found a certain fingertip, how that fingertip was around a certain wall, where something had probably lobbed it off, and there were no phones broken in the house. Well, you're in luck. Here's the first witness statement of Ben King. He brings that stuff up. He also counters other narratives as well. This is a devastating document, in my opinion, and it's one that definitely deserves your attention. Yeah, buckle up. This will be an interesting one. So hey there. So today, you and I, we are returning to that wonderful world of Johnny Depp coverage. And the reason for this is quite simple, because someone almost had themselves canceled. They were not guilty of what was said, and for 4 years, the media, they told you a narrative that was not true. This is rectifying that situation. All evidence will be archived, put in a playlist, so make sure that you check that out. Now, as far as Johnny Depp and AH are concerned, there have been a few major narratives put down, and one of those major narratives is Australia. Now, Ben King, he can testify directly to this. He actually gives us 2 witness statements, so let's look at this stuff here. So we have him telling us who he is. He says that he worked for the claimant, Johnny Depp and AH, as their house manager in London for 1 month, October 2014, and subsequently Australia 7 months, February 2015, August 2015, during Mr. Depp's filming of Pirates of the Caribbean. Now, this statement is made in support of Johnny Depp, and the reason that it exists is simple. It's to counter the paragraphs that you see here, all listed below. Now, I'm not going to go through these in just detailing, but if you've never heard this, I would suggest that you pause on this, read through it, because, again, I'm going to summarize these details, but like I say, you should be given all information. So, March 3rd, 2015, AH and claimant, they're in Australia. Now, AH claims that they have a 3-day ordeal kickoff, and this begins because of an argument about substance abuse or substance use, in which she supposedly takes something from Johnny Depp. Now, this altercation, it ends up with a ping pong table being broken, it ends up with broken glass and eventually ends with a hand being relieved of a finger. Also, it says the following morning, AH came downstairs to find numerous messages the claimant had written to her around the house, on walls, on her clothes, written in a combination of oil paint and blood from his finger. The claimant had also urinated all over the house in an attempt to write messages. Now, this person, they're commenting on those paragraphs. They say, quote, "During my employment with Mr. Depp and AH, I frequently witnessed AH goading and attempting to provoke Mr. Depp. I've never witnessed Mr. Depp be violent or unkind toward AH or indeed toward anyone else. In March 2015, I was urgently summoned by my colleagues to the rented house I was managing on behalf of Mr. Depp and AH in Australia. When I arrived, I found a significant amount of damage, particularly to the bar area and lower ground floor. The mirror behind the bar was heavily cracked, and there was broken glass and other debris strewn on or around the bar. I was told that Mr. Depp's fingertip had been severed. While cleaning up the broken glass and debris, I looked for the fingertip and found it on the floor of the bar area." So he found the fingertip. "I was not informed at the time what had caused the damage to the property or to Mr. Depp's hand. I suggested to Mr. Depp's head of security, Mr. Jerry Judge, that AH be removed from the property and escorted back to L.A. I volunteered to accompany AH, with whom I had great relation, and AH agreed to this. I did not notice any cuts, bruises, or injuries or redness of any kind to AH at the time." Now, I thought this was a fascinating portion. On the flight back to L.A., AH asked me, "Have you ever been so angry with someone that you just lost it?" I replied that had never happened to me. That is really hard to say back to back, by the way. So he seemed incredulous and asked again, "You have never been so angry with someone that you just lost it?" Again, I answered that I had not, and AH did not want to continue on this topic. This question seemed alarming to me, given the severity of the damage I had earlier witnessed at the house and the apparent serious injury to Mr. Depp's finger. I later read in the media that it was alleged that A.H. had thrown a glass vodka bottle at Mr. Depp, and when the bottle smashed on a marble countertop, which I had to subsequently clean up and have repaired, the impact of the bottle severed Mr. Depp's fingertip. Then we get to the dog fiasco, which basically says, yeah, A.H. is guilty of this problem. During my employment with Mr. Depp and A.H. in Australia, A.H. instructed me to take her and Mr. Depp's dog to local groomer to be cared for over the weekend while they traveled. Over this weekend, the grooming staff posted a number of photos of the dogs online. The publication of the dog's presence in Australia alerted the authorities to the fact that A.H. had illegally smuggled the dogs into the country. In the immediate aftermath, A.H. complained about me to Mr. Depp, who separately took me aside and told me I'd done nothing wrong and not to worry about this, basically blaming him for the issue. Yeah, fun times there. Then you have the second statement here. In the first statement, I set out 2 time periods where I worked for the claimant and A.H., namely in London, October 2014, and Australia, 2015. I did also work for Mr. Depp and A.H. in Vancouver in the spring of 2016. I'm providing this second statement as I have been asked to provide information about the consumption of alcohol by Mr. Depp and A.H. as I have witnessed or experienced, as well as their relationship, following on from questions I understand were asked of Mr. Depp at this trial. So we skip over the legalese and land on part 6. As I said in my first statement, I had a good relationship with A.H. On my first meeting with Mr. Depp and A.H. when they arrived in London, they individually seemed like decent people and a pleasant couple. I managed the property they had rented during their stay in London. Although I did not live at the house in London, I was there daily for most of the day, except for weekends when the two of them were living there. When I was being interviewed for the job, I was informed that Mr. Depp was teetotal, having been a drinker. This was just part of the information I was provided with to do my job properly in advance of the principals arriving. I vividly recall that when they arrived at the house, they brought with them a relatively large number of cases of wine. I was quite surprised by this, given what I had been told about the fact that Mr. Depp was teetotal. I can say that during their stay in London, I did not see Mr. Depp drink. It was A.H. who was drinking the wine. I believe she would regularly drink at least 1 to 2 bottles a night. Wow, that's quite a bit of wine to consume per night. I made a tally of the bottles of wine left on the counters or in the bins when I arrived each morning. I was usually the first one there. I would often see A.H. drinking wine. She would sometimes offer a glass to me. Almost every day, wine was open for her consumption. Often, she left a red wine glass on her bedside table. I know some couples where one is a former drinker and the other one still has a drink, but even so, I was surprised by A.H.'s consumption around Mr. Depp. During their stay in London, I often heard them argue a few times. On one occasion, I could hear them arguing from upstairs when I was going about my duties downstairs. On a number of occasions, mostly on Australia, Mr. Depp left notes downstairs before he went to work, saying things like, "Let's not do this again," and "I love you." They were usually left open on the kitchen or dining table, and he would sometimes leave notes from me too, if there were items he needed or small thank you notes. What a difference from the statements by Kate James, huh? Continuing, of what I had heard of their arguments, they could start from very banal beginnings. On one occasion in London, I recall A.H. complained that Mr. Depp had removed his hands from hers, and she complained along the lines of, "Maybe you don't love me because you took your hand away." The argument then carried on and escalated seriously. The way they argued could make them seem like school children. In hindsight, during the month in London and thereafter during my stay in Australia, I saw A.H. as the antagonizer. Mr. Depp seemed keen to walk out of or away from arguments. We heard that a million times, haven't we? It appeared it was A.H. who would want to continue them and pursued him to do so. I was aware on some occasions that he would walk out and then slam the door shut behind him. I want to make clear that I did not see any violence at any time. I did not want to accuse A.H. of anything, but this was what I saw of the pattern of their arguments. I had a good relationship with with both her and Mr. Depp individually. During their stay in London, some of AH's friends from the States came to visit. They stayed in the house as Mr. Depp and AH's guest. They seemed to have a good time partying, but it was only on that one occasion that they stayed for a large dinner. Toward the end of Mr. Depp and AH's stay in London, there was some damage to the bedroom. It was a red wine spill, which looked like it was the result of wine being thrown. It was a smashed glass and a smashed bottle beside the bed, and the wine on the fabric wallpaper and down the side of the bed. I had to get specialist cleaners in to clean the fabric wallpaper and carpet. AH had brought her 2 small dogs with her to London, and there was a fair amount of dog urine on the carpet that also had to be cleaned. I've already mentioned in my first statement that during the stay in Australia in March 2015, AH seemed to harangue Mr. Depp during the arguments, which seemed worse than they had been in London. So you're talking about an escalation here that he's noting. I arrived at the house on March 8, 2015, shortly after Mr. Depp had been driven away. I realized afterward that I had passed him on the driveway in my car as he was being driven in the opposite direction. As I said in my first statement, and I got to the house that day, there was a considerable amount of damage, particularly to the bar area on the lower ground floor. I was in charge of arranging the cleanup and replacing things or getting damage repaired. The immediate physical damage was tidied up, such as broken glass, paint, blood, liquid spillages, and broken china where a cup had struck the TV. I also cleaned the graffiti from the mirrors. I was there for several hours. I then went to pick up my bag and my passport once it was agreed that I would fly back to LA with AH. I left knowing that I would have to come back and get the house back in shape. I came back around a week later to deal with the larger cleanup work, such as organizing the floor to be sanded, the curtains cleaned, paint work and plaster work, and chip stone on the countertop in the bar area and on the staircase down to the bar where a flower vase had been launched from a kitchen area above. You notice the stonework chipping? That's fascinating, isn't it? Like maybe, I don't know, a bottle hit and took someone's finger off. I recently looked for photographs of the damage and I exhibited at. So we have an exhibit, a photograph which I took the afternoon of March 8, 2015 of the bar area. I'll show that at the end. It shows the countertop which was damaged and which I had arranged to get repaired. On the countertop is the phone. To the best of my recollection, that handset was not damaged, and I did not see any phones that had been broken. So you have something that is damaged, maybe from a bottle there, and the phone that's in the area, yeah, it wasn't. I did not arrange for any phones in the house to be replaced. So further, there are no phones damaged in the house, period. I do not recall damage to a wall where a wall-mounted phone had been forcibly removed, or a sign of any phone being ripped from a wall. I do not recall a shattered phone or handset. All of the phones in the house were Bakelite or plastic standard phones. A lot of the damage was paint and blood around the house. One of the ground floor rooms had been set up as a painting studio, and the paint appears to have come from there. The carpets and rugs in the house required professional cleaning, and I used a local company which were recommended because they had done work at the house before. As I would always do, when I have someone come to the house to clean up, I chaperone them around. As I said, they had to remove blood spots and paint splatters. However, there were no urine stains which needed to be cleaned. Remember, that was noted in detail at the end of those statements by AH. I did not see any signs of urine, did not smell it, and I would have done as someone urinated around the house. Also, none of the doors inside the house were damaged or any locks on the doors which had them. One thing which I did notice was that the blood spots appeared in a number of different rooms around the house. As I knew that Mr. Depp's finger had been cut, I believe that he must have walked away from where it happened, which I believe was the bar area where I found the fingertip. That's interesting, isn't it, as well? I did not see any injuries on AH when I saw her that day. She was certainly very hysterical and emotional, but there was no sign of any physical injury. As I explained in my first statement, I volunteered to accompany AH back to LA. I remember thinking that it would be better if she was at home. By the time of the flight, I was exhausted, as was AH, and I slept most of the flight. However, I did notice on one arm she had a couple of marks which looked like cuts and fairly uniform lines at a sort of diagonal angle downward. I recall saying to her when we landed in LAX that she might want to pull her sleeve down, as there might be paparazzi in the airport, just because it was LA. She did not refuse, but she chose not to. I did not have those marks in my mind when I made the first statement. As I said, I saw no injuries. When we landed, we were collected by a driver who I think worked for Mr. Depp and accompanied AH to the penthouse at our Eastern Columbia building. This, like I said, is a fascinating statement too. You know those marks there that look self-inflicted? Yeah, that's a comment about them and how she didn't want to hide them from the paparazzi, interestingly enough. Now, additionally, you have this photograph. I think this photograph is very telling too, especially if this is our supposed phone. You could see the way that this is laid out. It gives you an idea of how everything was situated. And like I said, it's pretty fascinating to have this person's testimony come in direct opposition to what AH was saying. And this person, they would know because they had to clean up the aftermath. But anyway, you let me know what you think about this. I think all of this stuff is curious, like I say, and it will come up in May 2021 when AH has to directly face off with Johnny Depp when she's asked about all these narratives. But anyway, let me know what you think about that. And again, appreciate you being here, showing up. You empower these endeavors. I want to say that every time because you make this stuff happen. And if you want to help out the channel, links in the description. Could definitely use your help on many things, including our comic book still, which is still in process. But yeah, thank you, appreciate you, and we'll see you soon.